Hi, I'm Gabriel Carrillo from the EdTech Bites podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Coming up on episode 175 of the House of EdTech podcast, I am going to tell you my thoughts on not being boring. I've got an awesome sound tool for you. We've got the House of EdTech VIP, and AJBianco and I have a conversation about 1 year later, a reflection on education from 2020 and where we are now. Strike up the band. Welcome to the House of EdTech podcast. I am your host, Chris Nesi. The House of EdTech explores how technology is changing the way teachers teach and the impact that technology is having in education. I discuss technology that is changing our classrooms and schools, and I share tools and tips that you can hear today and use tomorrow. You're going to hear the stories of teachers, leaders, and creators just like you. The purpose? Whether you use it or not, technology is changing the way you teach and how your students learn. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever you're listening, first and foremost, thank you for making House of EdTech a part of your anytime, anywhere professional development. Here we are, episode 175. It is the middle of March 2021, and it's time to reflect because it has been about a year since the world changed here in this country, socially, educationally, economically. I can't believe it. And I wanted to reflect on the last year because, as I've said for a long time, and I think I talk about it in a couple of segments in this episode, you know, the effective educator is the reflective educator. And it's very important to take time, all the time, no matter what's going on in the world, to reflect on what's going on for yourself. And not just professionally, it's great to be reflective personally. Okay? So I think it's important, and I want to model that. So in my EdTech Thought, I do some reflecting, and in the featured conversation of this episode, I share a conversation I had with my pal, AJBianco, and we reflect on a couple of different things. Me as a teacher, he as an administrator, and I give AJ the opportunity to talk about some of the changes that he went through and talk about his experiences over the last year. And it's a great conversation, and I think you'll get a lot of value out of everything in this episode. Before I get to that, though, just a couple of announcements here at the top of the show. One, AJ, Stacy, and I, we host Podcast PD, which you can find at podcastpd.com. And if you're not subscribed to Podcast PD, go check it out. We have a lot of fun, and that's my opportunity to talk about more than just education and technology because I have a lot of diverse interests in education, in addition to the strong love of technology that I do have. But recently, the three of us, representing Podcast PD, we had the opportunity to be a guest on one of the other great podcasts here on the Education Podcast Network, and that is the EdTech Bites podcast, hosted by Gabriel Carrillo. And the three of us were a guest on episode 85 of Gabe's podcast, which you can find at edtechbites.com. And I will have a direct link in the show notes to his 85th episode out at the show notes for this episode, which would be chrisnesi.com/175. And in that episode, Stacy, AJ, and I, and Gabe, we talk about our EdTech pet peeves. So it was a fun conversation, and I don't mean the term gimmick in a negative way, but the shtick of Gabe's podcast is he talks education, but you do it while breaking bread while you eat. So bites is BITES. So there is a food component involved in Gabe's podcast. And for that episode, Stacy, AJ, and I, all being from New Jersey, and if you are from New Jersey, you know, we did our food item. We selected pork roll. Now, if you're from North Jersey, I'm not about to get into this whole debate with you, pork roll, tail, or ham. And if you're not from New Jersey, you have no idea what the heck I'm talking about. But it was fun. If you go out to Gabe's episode and give it a listen, there's also an accompanying YouTube video, and you can watch us eat while we're having this conversation about our EdTech pet peeves. So check that out. Thank you to Gabe for inviting us on and having a great conversation. And yeah, I don't really need much of a reason to go get a good pork roll, egg, and cheese, but this was a really good reason to get one. So check that out. And if you're not subscribed to Gabe's podcast, make sure you subscribe to his show and check out all of the great podcasts we have on the Education Podcast Network, which you can find at edupodcastnetwork.com. Next up, I want to thank you for checking out Knock Knock Who's There. A lot of people have reached out on Twitter and some other social platforms to let me know that you've checked out Knock Knock Who's There, which is the new podcast that I do with my son, Miles, who, by the way, just had a birthday, and he is now 9 years old. And I cannot believe it has been 9 years of him being a part of, my wife's life, my life. So it's just amazing to go 9 years. And my goodness, we're so proud of him. And if you haven't checked out Knock Knock Who's There, you can go to knockknockpod.com. And as my son would say, no space between the words. And that podcast comes out 3 days a week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And it's me and my son. Right now, we're telling knock knock jokes. So it is family friendly. It is student friendly. It is classroom friendly. And if you want to encourage your students to podcast, here's a great example of something you can show them that is super simple to put together. And maybe you want to try podcasting yourself. I don't know. But if you do, reach out to me, because the other thing I want to thank you for is you may have been one of the first people who has picked up the Pod Journal, which I mentioned in the last episode. Now, the Pod Journal is my first physical offering. So up until now, I have only offered really this podcast as content that I have created. The Pod Journal is my first physical offering. It's a product. I sell it. And I was able to self-publish this through Kindle Direct Publish, so through Amazon. And a lot of people have picked this up. The feedback has been great on social media and emails I've gotten. And the wonderful thing is, I've gotten emails from people who I never even knew you listened to the podcast, but you purchased the Pod Journal and you're finding it valuable. Some of you are going to be using it with students. Some people are using it for themselves. And I am super appreciative of the fact that it is being accepted as something that is valuable. If you're interested in planning your podcast physically, again, there is no digital option available. And I did that intentionally. So if you're interested in planning the first or the next 100 episodes of your podcast, the Pod Journal will help you do it. And you can find that and pick it up at thepodjournal.com. And thank you if you purchase it and I don't know it yet, but please reach out, share your pictures of the Pod Journal on social media. Maybe you know a podcaster and you're not one, but this might be valuable. So if you know a podcaster, pick them up a copy of the Pod Journal. And thank you so much, because I'm really excited about it. It's really cool. It's really easy. And I think it's very helpful to those who are creating content. 3 more announcements. These are Clubhouse related items. So if you are on Android, don't worry, it is coming. So you're going to hear me talk about Clubhouse for a long time until it's probably not a thing, but it is super valuable and it is helping me take my professional development and the ability to connect with people to the next level, which is important. We're living in a time, obviously, where there's not a lot of social interaction going on, and the power of voice. Well, there, I just said it, the power of voice. You can listen to this podcast and it is an intimate experience, whether I'm in your car, in your earbuds, or playing on a Bluetooth speaker. I don't know how you listen to me, but we are connected. Now, just imagine getting onto something like Clubhouse where we can just talk like we're on the phone. Again, I've described it like Party Line. I did the episode about Clubhouse for Educators previously. If you haven't checked that out, you definitely want to go check that out. And again, that is episode number 173. You can go to chrisnessy.com/173 to listen to Clubhouse for Educators. So definitely check that out. But here's what's going on for the near future and the far future, as far as I could tell, how I'll be interacting on Clubhouse. On Tuesday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern, I am running Clubhouse of EdTech. So that's Tuesday nights, 10 p.m. Look for it. I've also been able to start the House of EdTech Club on Clubhouse, which you can follow or join. And some events that I do on there will be exclusive for quote unquote members of the House of EdTech Club. Some will be public, and hopefully I can continue to build this community and connect not only me with you, but you with other people who are interested in education and technology. And, we can come together through this podcast, the House of EdTech. On Mondays and Friday mornings from 7 to 7:30 a.m., I am supporting Stacy Lindes, my podcast PD compañera. From 7 to 7:30 when she drives to school, we're doing like a morning radio show. On Mondays, we call it the Monday Morning Drive-In. And on Fridays, we do the Weekend Review. And I'm sort of producing that for Stacy, where I moderate and she comes up with questions and we chat for like a half hour, and we want you to be a part of that. So if you are up wherever you are from 7 to 7:30 a.m. Eastern time, come out and be a part of that. And then on Thursdays, we have now done 2 weeks of a very successful thing called EdCamp Clubhouse. So that also has its own club, as does Podcast PD. So if you're on Clubhouse, you can search for these clubs and you can become members of these clubs. And when I say member, that doesn't mean you pay anything, but you could be in the know in addition to just following the club. So that's how I'm being active on Clubhouse. And it's also come up in the House of EdTech Discord community. And I am exploring some new ways, or not new ways, but how I can make that even better. Thank you if you have joined the Discord community. If you haven't, again, there's no more Facebook group. You want to go to chrisnesi.com/discord. That's DISCORD, and join the Discord community, where there's some great conversation and people making recommendations and connecting. And I want to find ways to connect via voice in that platform as well, because if you haven't figured it out, voice and speaking is very powerful. So I can't stress that enough. So that's all the announcements here at the top of the episode. Now we're going to get into the EdTech Thought, the recommendation, and my featured content with AJBianco. So let's do this first. Let's do the EdTech Thought. So for the first time ever, I did the EdTech Thought on the go. So I'm about to play you audio that I recorded in my car as I started to think about this idea of not being boring. And it stems from a conversation I had with somebody on Instagram where I encouraged this person to encourage others to simply not be boring. And that got me thinking about it should be very easy for us to tell people not to be boring and to encourage creativity. So the audio is not as pristine as what you're hearing right now, but I gave it a shot. I tried it, and it just goes to show you that you can create audio on the go. So here's me passing it off to me for an EdTech Thought about not being boring. So for this episode's House of EdTech Thought, I wanted to talk about not being boring. I think it's that simple as a teacher to just not be boring. When we plan lessons, when we try to design activities for our students, I don't think it's that difficult to not be boring. I mean, if you're still planning lessons and doing things in an antiquated way, some of those things might be boring. You might be wondering why your students aren't engaging with your content. Now, part of it, as I record this in, March of 2021, could be hybrid learning is a difficult situation to be in. If you're still virtual, it might be difficult for students to engage virtually based on their learning environment. There's a lot of factors that can contribute to the student's experience. But regardless of what grade you teach and what subject you teach,
I think you need to think about how excited are you about the topics, or how can you get excited about the topics. For me personally, I teach high school history, and I enjoy history. That's why I got a degree in it. But I don't love history as much as some other people that I know who teach history. But I don't see history as something that needs to be memorized. My approach to teaching history is that history is the vehicle that I can use to teach the 4 C's, like I talked about in the last episode: creativity, communication, collaboration, and critical thinking. My expectation isn't that my students will or have to love history. If they do, that's great. That's great for them. They're going to get even more out of it. But the bare minimum would be to use the historical content to get better at those 4 things. And I try to do that in an exciting way by doing a project-based class, or what I perceive to be a project-based class, where I don't give traditional assessments, tests, quizzes, multiple choice, things of that nature. Everything is a project and a rubric, whether I'm designing the rubric or my students are designing parts of the rubric and deciding how they will be graded or assessed on something. It's not always easy. There are things that I design that I think are great, or, I've talked about it with, in-class support teachers I've worked with, and we go into something thinking this is going to be something special. This is going to be the thing that our students are really going to enjoy. And sometimes it flops, and sometimes it is. And sometimes these lessons and projects exceed our expectations, and students surprise us with what they come up with and what they're capable of creating or collaborating on with their peers. But to think that you can't just not be boring, try something different. Get outside of the box. If anything, over the last year, as we've been in this pandemic and, quarantining and virtual and hybrid and all the things that have shaken up so many aspects of our lives, I think it is easy to say, don't be boring. Try something new. I'm sure there are things that you have learned, just like I have, over the last 365 days about education. Now, I'm sure there'll be a future EdTech Thought on a future episode about how we're going back to what we used to do, and I'll preview that by saying it's going to be sad, and I'm going to be very aggravated when things go back to the way they were and we don't see a lot of real change, or maybe depending on where you are, where you teach, you don't see a lot of change. But that's an EdTech Thought for another episode. But when we come back to not being boring, why are we afraid to try something different? I've been talking to you for over 170 episodes about don't be afraid. Using technology isn't difficult. I hope you're not boring. I hope you try to be exciting and engaging. And if not, what's stopping you? What prevents you from taking that risk? I'd love to know. Maybe you and I could have a conversation about it. I would love to encourage you to not be boring and get on a Google Meet or a Zoom or a FaceTime or the phone. And maybe I don't even need to do that. Don't be boring. Don't be boring. Try something different. I don't think it's that difficult. Now, if it is, you need to play the game of education with the rules you're given for sure, but try something different. Try something exciting. Get yourself excited about the assignment, the project, the topic. And I'm not even talking about faking it till you make it. Really, just do it. If you're recording assignments, or you're flipping your classroom, or you pre-record some content, and I don't care what level you teach at. I don't care if you're a first grade teacher, a ninth grade teacher, or you teach college students. Be engaging. That's the art of teaching. The art of teaching is the stuff that you don't get taught when you go through your teacher preparation program, right? You know your content, you know the science, and you understand pedagogy, but the art of teaching, the ability to get up in front of a group of people and engage them, that can't be taught. You can learn how to do that. That, to me, the art of teaching is like creativity. to some degree, we are all creative. To some degree, we all possess skills that make up the art of teaching and how we engage others in learning. But it takes practice. Hopefully, you are more engaging today than you were at the start of your career. Hopefully today, you are trying new things and you have figured out things that work, things that don't work. You've been a reflective educator who has gone back and reflected on things that work, things that don't work, and you have a bag of tricks, whether it's ed tech or different assignments or strategies that you employ with your students in your classes or your school. But in terms of not being boring, that comes from what you do outside of this profession, how you grow personally. I've been saying for many months now that it's not professional development, it's about personal development. When you grow as a person and you become more well-rounded and more dynamic and you explore all different things that you're interested in that will make you a better person, you will become a better educator. How could you not? How could you not enjoy life and more enjoy what you do in the classroom if you are enjoying all aspects of your life, whether it's in your personal relationships, your professional relationships, your personal business, your professional business? How could you not get better as a teacher if you are constantly striving to be better as a person? That's going to make you engaging when you've got other things to talk about and ways to communicate and collaborate with your students. So that's going to help you to not be boring. So I will finish this EdTech thought by saying, go out there and explore your passions, explore your interests, become a better person, become a better teacher, become more engaging, and then you won't be boring. And that's my EdTech thought.
Now it's time for this episode's House of EdTech recommendation. And in this episode, I'd like to recommend the website myinstance.com. That's myinstants.com. Now, I want to put a disclaimer and a warning on this in that you probably don't want to show your students this website, but you might want to make it available to you to use. It is a soundboard website where you can upload your own sounds, or they've got all of these sounds that are just readily available on this website. You can curate your favorites and you can kind of build your own soundboard, but I put the disclaimer here because there are sounds on here that you probably don't want to use in class. And I wouldn't recommend you showing the site to your students because then they could see the sounds and the names of some of the sounds. But that's the disclaimer I'm going to put on this. But if you go to myinstance.com, you can kind of curate your own soundboard. And it looks like the video game button. So it's these big, bright, colorful buttons that you could link to, you could favorite, and you could kind of curate your own soundboard to use either in your classroom or if you're teaching hybrid in a Google Meet or a Zoom call. So if you're into playing sounds or you are curious, how could I get sound effects into my classroom or into my virtual meeting, I think this is something you could check out. But again, I wouldn't show the site directly to your students, or I would be very careful about how I curate the sounds because there are sounds and titles of sounds that you probably don't want kids to see. So proceed with caution. But if used right and you do it appropriately, I think it could be a valuable tool. And that's very simply this episode's EdTech recommendation. All right, now it's time for the featured content. And as I said at the top of the episode, I had a conversation with my podcast PD compadre, AJBianco, host of the Reflect Ed podcast, and as I say, my best friend in education and probably right now in life. So we had a good conversation about the last year, and thank you in advance and again to AJ for taking time late one night to have this conversation that I recorded. So without any further ado, here is me and AJBianco. All right, little featured content here in this episode of the House of EdTech, and I am joined by one of my best friends in education, probably my best friend in life right now, and I don't expect him to return the favor, but AJBianco, my podcast compadre from Podcast PD, host of the Reflect Ed podcast. Been a long time since you've been here in the house. What's up, buddy?
Yeah, I haven't been invited in quite some time. Door's been locked and boarded up. Keep AJ out. But I appreciate those kind words. I guess you're just trying to butter me up as you invite me back here years later. Years.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, we do Podcast PD every other week, and we've been doing that for almost 100 episodes.
Almost.
You've got your own podcast now, which I've been a guest on, and
yeah.
I did talk about being a guest on your show when I was. And by the way, that would be episode 7, Reflect Ed podcast, for those who still not subscribed. Well, I don't know what you're doing if you're not listening to AJ's podcast, because, hey, I get to talk to him whenever I want. You should be subscribed to his podcast, listening to him when he releases content, which
I appreciate that.
Is more regular now. Yeah, AJ, I love you.
I love you. I love you too. The feeling is mutual. You are one of my guys. I don't have many guys. You're one of my guys.
I will go in a foxhole with you.
Ooh, appreciate that. We can cower in the corner together.
Yeah, we kiss our asses goodbye. So AJ, I wanted to have you on the show because, we are similar yet different. We bring unique perspectives to education technology, and we've both gone through the last year of education. We've talked about some of this stuff on Podcast PD. I've talked about some of these things here on the podcast, but here we are, basically a year from the world changing, education changing, our own worlds changing. And I've been saying for years that the effective educator is the reflected educator. And there you go. You do your own podcast about reflecting as an educator, right? Reflect Ed. Where are you at here a year later?
It's so weird for me. I've reflected on myself. I reflected on what education should look like. I reflected on what leadership looked like. I've changed roles in this environment. I've helped schools and districts really kind of figure out a plan to make it safe. And I feel good about that because I feel like where I was in both places right now, the beginning of the year and where we are now, I feel like we are safe. And I feel like I can say that, we're doing everything we can to keep our students and our teachers safe. But this year has been a different one. But, I talked about this at the beginning of the school year. A lot of positives should really come about this year. And I think that's where I've kind of been reflecting. Like, we know there's negatives. We know there are some issues. We know there are problems. We know not everybody can be happy and everybody has some kind of fear in some way. But when we really look at education as a whole, there are some good things going on that's going to change what we have going forward.
I got to be honest. I am afraid not to go back to school, which, as I sit here recording this, I'm going to be doing in 9 days. Okay, I'm going to be returning to the high school. Instead of being virtual, teachers in my district will be returning to the school buildings to teach students who will still be virtual. And students will return where I'm at to hybrid. They'll start hybrid learning at the end of April. Right. And what I'm afraid of, I'm looking past the hybrid learning. I'm looking more towards next school year in my mind. And what I'm afraid of, and what makes me sad, what I know is going to aggravate me, and I've started to express this in some different forums, is going back to the way things were. And people who I know that they are out there. I hope it's not you who's listening, but there are people out there who I know are chomping at the bit to just go back to the way it was before the pandemic. And, whether it's teachers or administrators, present company excluded, who want to go back to what it was. Simpler times, quote unquote, normal times. And I think in too many places, we're going to miss the opportunity to move education forward.
That is something I've reflected on as well. And it's something that's inevitable. It's going to happen. We are going to have the teachers who find their comfort zone again, who think now that they're back in their classrooms that they can just do what they've been doing because that was a successful thing. This is why we need strong leaders. And I'm not saying I'm the only one who's doing this. I'm not saying that, I'm an outlier. There are teachers out there who are going to fall back, and it's going to be the administrator's job to really push and show the teachers and coach them, not mandate, coach them to show them what it looked like and why it was successful. It's going to be up to the leaders to really continue to say, here is our goal for the year. Here's our goal for our students. Here's our goal for what teaching should look like. Let's continue this. And if you need help doing it, here's resource A, B, and C. Just saying, go teach, you're going to get the same old, same old. You got to model, you got to show, you got to let people, find their comfort in this new environment.
And I think there needs to be, the grace, the latitude, and the opportunity to do that. And when I say leadership, I know that there's a lot of layers to what makes education tick, let's say. And it's not like right now, you are in the role of building administrator. You're a vice principal of a middle school. You've got a principal that you work with, but you guys report to, assistant superintendents and superintendents. But that real change isn't going to be widespread. It's going to happen higher than a district. It's going to happen. We're looking at least in this country, what is the Department of Education going to do? What real changes can we make? Are districts going to be able to make some changes? Yes. Are we going to see some things that have happened in education over the last year that were good continue? Yes. But the grandiose ideas that I've talked about, that you've talked about, that we've talked about together, in different circles, my mind moves at one speed, and maybe it's where I fail in that I don't always look at the big picture, and I can't always picture all the scenarios, and I run into this when I make suggestions to my principal about stuff like now with schedules and different things where I feel like I've got a good idea, and it's always like, thank you, Mr. Nessie, for your idea. And then there's always this other thing that I never think of as to why something can't happen when I'm like, this is a great idea. And I never think of the thing that makes it not something we can do, which is frustrating.
Right. We're all put in different situations, right? There's mandates from the state. There's mandates from the nation. There's mandates from the district that we all have to do. And then there's some things, and I'm not saying this in any way, but there's some things that we know that teachers don't know that they can't know. So, when we start making plans in one way, we know why we're doing it, that teachers don't need to know at this time because it's too many steps in advance, but it's a plan that we're putting forward to prep what we can so we can see if it works. I think it's what we're talking about here. I think we got to play nice in the sandbox, right? We're all going to be together. We're all going to play. We're all going to share. And no matter what, outside that sandbox, things are going to be happening. Things are going to be thrown at us. Things are going to distract us. In our sandbox, if you look at our district, you look at your district, you have to make sure the things that you're doing are impacting your district in a positive. Forget everything else going on around us. The state testing is going to be there. Our state of New Jersey is trying to fight the idea of state testing. The nation right now, they want the state testing in the worst way. So that's being passed down to the state. The state's trying to deflect the best they can, but what's going to happen. It's going to come down to us again. Then it's going to come to the district. Then it's going to come to the administration, and we're going to have to find out some ways or figure out some ways to make this work. Do we want to? No. Do we think it's a waste of time? Yes. In the end, we're going to have to do it. So if we can all play nice in our sandbox, work together, cooperate, share, get through it for a couple of days, then we'll be better off when we look at it and say, okay, here's how we worked together and collaborated. Let's keep doing that. Let's keep making our school stronger. That's going to help our students. It's one blip. It's a speed bump. And then we get past it.
I like that. I like the metaphor of the sandbox. I like the idea of working together. And I think more than ever, I think you see teachers and leaders collaborating in new ways, and the cultures and the dynamics of school are different, right? You know, we've talked about on Podcast PD, we've had the conversation about what would we like to see stick that we're doing now. We've talked about, you know, virtual faculty meetings and, you know, different things like that, how we've learned to adapt and still accomplish what we typically accomplish, but doing it in new ways and taking advantage of some of the technology. But let's go back to you since I have you here. So you said that you changed roles during this. You went from a district technology leader, supervisor of technology, involved in the C&I part of the district that you were in. And now you find yourself, and maybe at some point we got to talk on Podcast PD or bring you back on this, what it was like to transition through this. So I'm not going to go into that today, but now you find yourself, you're a middle school vice principal. What's that like? How's that going? And what has that experience been like during these times that you've been in this for, what, 4 or 5 months now?
Yeah, since October. So that's when I started the first week of October. What's it been like? It's been weird. It's been weird. I don't know any other way to say it. I mean, it's not been a bad thing, but it's just been strange because I came into the school in October and the kids were not there yet. They were all remote with the goal of coming back in November. That happened. They came back in November for 3 weeks and we went out for Thanksgiving and the kids didn't come back till January. And now since January, proud to say we've been in school. It's now March. We've been in school the entire time. A couple of bumps here and there. We haven't had to close, which has been fantastic. We're going to knock on wood. But throughout this time, and I say weird because it took me a while to get to know the teachers. I didn't know their instruction. I didn't know what they liked, what they didn't like, where they want to grow. I did observations, but how do you do a virtual observation? You know, you're not really seeing the relationships there. You're not seeing how the teachers interact. I was walking empty hallways during the day. You know, I'm there. Teachers were allowed in the building. They could teach from their classrooms. So I made some good relationships with those people who came in, but I was still missing things. Then as the kids came in, we were on the AB hybrid schedule. We had all virtual Mondays. So it was very hard for me to get to know the kids. And that was kind of killing me. My whole thing is building on the students, being there for them, building a rapport with them. So it was hard for me to get to know them. I started popping the classes, and all you're seeing is eyes, right? So you don't know who the kids are. As they come in the morning, I'm outside, but I just couldn't do it. I am very happy right now that for the last week and a half, we'll say at this point, we've had our kids coming in 4 days a week, mixed cohorts. So I'm starting to get to know the students. They're starting to get to know me. It's starting to really feel like school again. And even though I know the nerves are there for the kids, for the teachers, for myself at times, we just have to be smart about what we're doing. And, we're still trying to figure out schedules. We're still trying to figure out our cycles. We're still trying to figure out how we can make everything fit into a half day. I know a lot of people out there are arguing, whether they're parents or if they're educators, arguing for these full days, for 5 days. Why can't we have lunch after we're vaccinated, so on and so forth? That's not a reality right now. The way I look at it, right? Like, we're all winning. If a school is open and kids can enter the building, we're winning. There's nothing else we have to do right now, in my opinion, to challenge this anymore. You're going to have those superintendents who want to be bold and there's, patting themselves in the back for opening up 5 days with lunch. Don't be that guy or girl. Don't put everybody else at risk because you want to make a name for yourself. It's going to backfire at some point. So let's just keep winning. Let's get the kids in the building. Let them do their learning. Let them enjoy it. And then next year in September, we look at this again and we figure out what we can do so it's not as weird.
Simple enough, right? Let's just not be weird.
You would think.
You would think. And again, I'm sure, like I said, as a teacher, there's things that I never think of. And I'm sure even as an administrator, there are things that you don't think of that pertain to your role. And you're like, how did I not think of that?
So many times. I think I've actually said those words a number of times.
Now, again, since this is the House of EdTech, obviously we want to talk about education and technology. In the administrative role, again, from one district where you were heavily involved in technology back in the spring and, the start of this school year, and now as an administrator, what are some things you can share and reflect on in terms of the role that technology has played for you in these two jobs? Or if you just want to focus on what you do now as an administrator, how is technology helping you do what you do during this time? And again, what education looks like right now?
So, I have a weird relationship with technology and technology companies, right? When we went through the quarantine, it was great to see so many companies really shine and allow us to try a lot of the free things. Since we are connected, I was able to, in my previous role, I was able to be like, hey, look, this is free, something you've wanted to do for months now. Go get, just throw one out there, Edpuzzle, right? Go do the trial of Edpuzzle where you're allowed to collaborate and do this and edit it and blah, 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 right? So like that was part of it because we were remote. That was the best tool, right? Padlet, here, do this with your students. Those free tools were great. It helped me continue to make the connections to my teachers that I was building from September to March. It helped me have those conversations. Now in this role where I'm not doing that technology part so much, I still want to stay relevant with technology because I still see a great impact on our students' learning with the technology. I'm using a lot of tools to communicate with families, with students. Social media is a big part of it. Trying to introduce things to teachers to help them make their lessons even better than what they are. So like, I'm trying to stay up to date. I'm still trying to learn. I'm not saying, okay, I'm in this role, I don't need technology, it's on you, the teacher. No, my role is to coach still. My role is to help, instruction, still have to be the instructional leader. So here are some examples, whether they're small examples through Google, or if it's a major example through a site that I think is going to be beneficial. I'm still trying to find ways to tie all these things in to our lessons to help our students grow. I wish I can sit here and say, here's a great tech tool I can name off the top of my head, but I'm so scattered right now that like there's so many tools swirling around and so many things that I would love to get for the teachers, simple things, Pear Deck, Nearpod, I said Padlet already, but these things that are going to be helpful. I like those tools. I don't want to say, here's a brand new website that I know is going to do X, Y, and Z, when in reality, I have no idea. I don't want them trying new things that are going to make them nervous. I want to try the things that are tried and true that I know are going to work and help that teacher.
Right. Even I've shared here on the show before how, I am that guy in my building, and teachers will come to me and they'll be like, hey, Ness, I'm getting observed on Friday and I just found XYZ tool. What do you know about it? I want to use, and I'm like, wait, you want to use the tool the first time I'm like, no. Go with what you know. The first time you use a tool shouldn't be when you're getting observed, unless you talk about it with an administrator ahead of time. Like, hey, I'm going to try this and we'll figure some stuff out.
I'm glad you said that because that's one of the questions I ask my teachers when I talk to them about their observations. They know me, they see my stuff, that we've talked about this. The things I say to them, I'm like, look, just because I know technology and people say I'm the tech guy, quote unquote, because I probably know the most technology in the building, don't throw bells and whistles at me. Don't try a technology tool just because you saw that it worked for a different teacher. I was like, make it fit your lesson. If you haven't tried it, don't do it. If you're not comfortable but you've tried it, don't do it. I don't care if your lesson is basic. I tell the teacher all the time, I want to see engagement. I want to see rapport. I want to see student-centered learning. I'm not there for the technology. At this point in our teaching right now, you're going to use technology. I'm going to give you a 3 or a 4 on the rubric for doing that. So just go in there and show me what you're made of. Show me how good you are as a teacher.
I love it. I love that approach. Teaching courses to administrators, AJ.
Yeah, right. That's me.
Up and comers. What's something? And again, I want to thank you for your time. It's late as we're recording this, and I appreciate you so much and the conversations that we've had, whether it's podcast PD, just for fun. What is something that you hope sticks? That there's been this change. We've seen it during this time period. Is there something that you hope remains a part of education going forward as we return to normal? And when I say normal, I just mean all the kids back in school when we get there. What do you hope still is a part of education that comes out of this?
To be honest, the thing that I hope for most of all is that the teachers continue to have the excitement and enthusiasm that they have right now. I know there's fear. I know there's a lot of problems. I know that there's a lot of issues with some people. But no matter what, props to the teachers, because the teachers are working incredibly hard. They're working long hours. I don't want that to happen anymore, obviously. But they're working long hours. They're putting together beautiful lessons. They're trying to help students in so many ways. They're communicating with families. They're connecting with students virtually, in person, whatever the case may be. But I hope that continues. I hope that the teachers continue to see that it is working, that even though it may not look like it right now because our students are really struggling in so many ways, that it's making an impact on our students. And I hope that the teachers can continue to push themselves to be enthusiastic and positive about this profession, to show why they got in here, to help students, to make them better people, better members of society, better members of a community, whatever the case is. Just, I hope that they don't forget the meaning of being a teacher.
I think that's a great place to stop, AJ. Good words, my man. So for people who want to continue to learn with you, again, I mention your name on this show all the time, and the fact that we do podcast PD together. But for anybody who has not followed my directions and taken my sage advice to connect with you, how can they do that? And also, please talk about your podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris. So obviously I'm on the socials, Twitter, Instagram at AJBianco, LinkedIn, AJBianco, Facebook, AJBianco, all those good things. I don't do TikTok. I know you're going to fight me on this one, but I'm not doing it yet. I got an idea that I want to share at some point, but not yet.
Okay.
But okay. AJBianco on all the socials, you can find me there. Find me on Podcast PD with Chris and Stacy, or check me out on my podcast at ReflectEd, reflectedpodcast.com. Again, on Twitter at ReflectEdPod. And that's really just my reflections on education, what's going on around us. I interview some wonderful people like Christopher Nessie as we focus on things that he's doing in his classroom. Got some good guests lined up. I got some good episode thoughts and notes all planned out. So actually episode 10, if you're listening to this when this releases, episode 10 will come out on Monday, the 15th, and then 2 weeks later on Monday, the 29th. So 2 episodes coming at you if you want to check them out. I would greatly appreciate it. Going to shift my focus a little bit with reflection. As a leader now, I think I might start running that a little bit more. What leadership should look like in teachers and administrators.
I love it. I appreciate it. You inspire me just about every day because, again, I could talk to you anytime that I want, whereas other people, I guess in theory they could. You're pretty approachable. You're not like one of these people who, if I ask you a question on Twitter, you're never going to respond. So if you want to have a relationship with AJ Bianco like I do, just reach out to AJ Bianco on the socials. And the new place we like to play is Clubhouse. So make sure you connect with us there as well, whether it's through the Clubhouse of EdTech or what we do with Podcast PD or, what we do with EdCamp Clubhouse, which is, taking the world by storm. So connect with AJ, continue the conversation. And Arthur Johnson, I appreciate your time here on the House of EdTech.
I love being here. Thanks for letting me come in. Appreciate you opening the door this time.
And before we close the door on this episode of the House of EdTech, let's meet this episode's House of EdTech VIP. Let's meet Cheri Dotterer. Cheri is an international dysgraphia consultant, author, and speaker who trains child development professionals to recognize invisible learning disabilities to help students overcome trauma and shame associated with their disability and rewrite their story through grace. She's the author of the Amazon best-selling book, Handwriting Brain-Body DisConnect, is an occupational therapist for over 25 years with a private practice in Pennsylvania. She's a graduate of Alvernia and Misericordia Universities, and she has been an adjunct and guest lecturer. Cheri and her husband of 30 years have 2 adult children, and she encourages you to embark on a journey to rewrite the story of today's children. You can look into their future today through research and professional and personal development. For more information about Cheri and her work, you can go to her website, Dotterer.com. There'll be a link in the show notes, and you should connect with Cheri on Twitter, and her Twitter handle is Cheri Dotterer, CheriDotterer. I was able to connect with Cheri through Clubhouse, and she was actually very generous and kind and sent me a copy of her book, which I am getting ready to dig into, and she sent me some other books as well. So thank you, Cheri, for the books. It's been great to connect with you on Clubhouse, and you should connect with Cheri, whether it's Clubhouse, Twitter, her website, because she's a fantastic person, and I'm glad to know her, and I am looking forward to continuing to learn with her and from her. Congratulations, Cheri. You are a House of EdTech VIP. Thanks for checking out this episode of the House of EdTech and making it a part of your anytime, anywhere professional development. Thanks to my buddy AJBianco for taking time to have a fantastic conversation, and I believe you got value from that conversation. Thank you so much for listening. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's be reflective, okay? Whether it's about this episode or any episode I've done or will do. I want to know your thoughts. If you want to make a comment on the show notes, go out to chrisnesi.com/175, or on the website, go to chrisnesi.com/feedback, and you can email me, send me a voicemail, all the different ways you can connect and let me know your thoughts, ask questions, etc. Also, remember that Discord community, chrisnesi.com/discord. Would love to have you be a part of it. And maybe we'll connect on Clubhouse and all the places that I try to be effectively. Now, if you enjoyed the podcast, you got this far, let me tell you a couple things you could do to support the show. First, tell somebody else about the House of EdTech. Tweet about it, Instagram about it, put a link on Facebook, share the podcast. I want to reach and help as many people as possible, and you, the House of EdTech Army, can help me do that. So make sure you share the show socially. You could also become an awesome supporter. The Awesome Supporter Program is powered by Patreon.com, which allows a consumer of content like you to support a creator of content like me. Many thanks to my awesome supporters, who include Anthony Arnault from the STEM Class Podcast, Dan Gallagher. Find his writings at gallaghertech.edublogs.org. Carlos Garza, Mr. G, from the Ace Tech Podcast. Peggy George, at PGeorge on Twitter. Jeff Herb, at Jeff Herb on Twitter. Mike Messner, who I recently got to reconnect with on Clubhouse. Connect with him on Twitter, at Messner_Mike. The incomparable Matt Miller from Ditch That Textbook. Thank you, Matt, for being an awesome supporter of the podcast. JP Prezavento from the Bits and Bytes of Education podcast at jpprez.com. And we've got a new awesome supporter. Welcome, Patty Reefus. She is at PGR Teaches on Twitter, and she is an ISTE certified educator from Michigan. Patty, welcome to the club. Thank you for supporting the show. Lori Simpson, at North L Simpson on Twitter, and Kyle Wilcox at Level Up EdTech. If you want to be awesome, go to chrisnesi.com/awesome. The next episode of the podcast is episode 176, and that's going to come your way on March 28th, 2021, and that's the 2021 House of EdTech Final Four. Until next time, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try.